Welcome to Inclusion Bites, your sanctuary for bold conversations that spark change. I'm Joanne Lockwood, your guide on this journey of exploration into the heart of inclusion, belonging, and societal transformation. Ever wondered what it truly takes to create a world where everyone not only belongs, but thrives? You're not alone. Join me as we uncover the unseen, challenge the status quo, and share stories that resonate deep within. Ready to dive in? Whether you're sipping your morning coffee or winding down after a long day, let's connect, reflect, and inspire action together. Don't forget, you can be part of the conversation too. Reach out to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk to share your insights or to join me on the show. So adjust your earbuds and settle in. It's time to ignite the spark of inclusion with Inclusion Bites. And today is episode 178 with the title, Breaking Barriers for Women. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome Christine Boston. Christine is a lifelong gender equality advocate and leadership specialist who's on a mission to build inclusive cultures that empower everyone to thrive. When I asked Christine to describe her superpower, she said that it is turning strategic vision into inclusive, purpose-led action. Hello, Christine. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Joe. Nice to see you.
Yeah, and we were just chatting in the green room just now, and we first connected on LinkedIn in 2018. So we've been stalking each other for 7 years. That's a while.
A long time indeed.
And did I pick up on the fact you're based in Wales? Is that right?
I am in Wales, yeah, just outside Cardiff.
Lovely city. I've spent many a night out in the near the Wetherspoons area, the Prince of Wales, is it?
That's the one, yeah.
In my younger days, when I was a bit more of a party animal than I am now.
Great part of town.
So the kids are breaking up for Easter soon, aren't they? Is that right?
They are, yeah. One more week of school, and then they'll be home for 2 weeks.
Wow. What are you going to do with them?
Well, probably avoid the rain. We've had really good weather all week, in the run up to the Easter holiday. So that means it's definitely going to be a wet one. So I'm sure we'll be, doing lots of soft play and finding some indoor activities to keep them occupied instead of letting them run around outside.
Well, the introduction, I said this is, the title is Breaking Barriers for Women. And I realise and know that that's a huge passion of you around gender equity and equality for all genders and calling out some of the constructs that are there. So what got you into what you're doing? And give us a bit of background as to why you do that.
Yeah, so I've been a gender equality activist since I was about 6 or 7. And I know that always kind of sounds really strange, how is that possible? But actually, I grew up in a Catholic family. So we were at church every week. I went to a Catholic school, and it was about that age that, as a girl, I realised there were things that I would be told I couldn't do, just for that reason. No other good reason, just because I'm a girl. So, we were kind of, as girls, we'd sit and think, well, that's not fair. Why can't we do that? And that's kind of where it started. And then I was a child of the 80s as well. So, that was a really big time for women's empowerment. And I don't think, there was any way really of avoiding having that influence me. In my household as well, my mum was the main earner, but we'd still have salespeople ringing the house and not wanting to speak to her, but wanting to speak to my dad, or, if they're coming round, can they come round when my dad's home? Because they're still kind of obsessed with the man making the buying decisions, and that wasn't the case practically in my home growing up. So, but of course it was into the 80s, the Sex Discrimination Act was passed in 1975. So kind of awareness, empowerment was kind of really coming about. It was the era of women having independence, being financially independent. Because of the new legislation, women then, they could no longer be told they had to have a male guarantor to have a mortgage, for example. They could have their own bank account, they could have their job. And it was kind of the age of the superwoman archetype. Women, you can have it all, you can have the career, the big shoulder pads, the family, all that. Yeah, so that those kind of like values and ideals really sunk in for me. So I was very determined I was going to have the career, I was going to have the independence I was going to, from that point, I kind of really championed women's rights, and I have been a trailblazer myself. The changes in terms of altar service. I mean, this sounds really geeky, doesn't it? And I'm not a massive religious church goer these days, but it is true to say that, I played a major role in shaping the kind of system where boys could serve on the altar and girls couldn't, and now boys and girls do that equally, and I just believe that if you want to, and there's no practical reason why you shouldn't, then that ought to be okay. So I brought about a lot of change, and then I was very determined myself to be financially independent. Because kind of women then were able to get mortgages, get property in their own right. That's what I was going to do. I bought my first house when I was 21. I think kind of to get a real idea of what that's like, I found The Handmaid's Tale really like enlightening, because they're going through a time, at the kind of beginning of season 1 where they're losing all these rights again. Only the men can have the bank account. So all your money and your bank account and your assets have to go in, your brother's or your husband's name. And so I think, that's a really good way to sort of understand it, and it brings it to life in the modern day. And then I went on to work in gender equality professionally. I was policy and research lead for the Welsh charity Chwarae Teg, which was an organisation focusing on gender equality in the economy. Then I was a founding trustee of WEN Wales, which is the Women's Equality Network in Wales. I spent some time in Africa working for the Federation of Women Lawyers FIDA in Lesotho. And I've had my own women's leadership journey. In those roles, I've done a lot on women's leadership, and I kind of really took that to heart and sort of have, tried to be a women's leadership role model myself as well in my own career.
So Wales, for those of you who are listening outside of the UK, is a separate country. You have a different culture maybe to the rest of the UK. I know that the Welsh government were very forthright in gender equity and promoting women in society and leadership roles. Do you think that's had a big influence on you, the fact that you are Welsh and not English or not British, if you like, and there's an identity around that?
Yeah, so I was born in England, made in Wales.
Right.
So my career has been in Wales. My gender equality professional career has been Wales. And yes, I kind of work very close with government, very closely with the most senior women in Wales. And yeah, there is a kind of, attitude, ethos that, women can be and will be leaders too, that we need gender diversity and a broader diversity in decision making. And there've been, some wins, some losses. I think we have a gender balanced cabinet now. We've certainly had them in the past. But then the number of women in the Senate, the Welsh Parliament, that's gone down over the years, and there continues to be a drive to try and increase that. And I think, it's the societal barriers, I think, that get in the way, stereotypes, things like that really need to be discussed out in the open and addressed as far as possible.
In the workplace, when we talk about career and aspirations, there's always this, I think, is it dichotomy? You can't have it all. Women still have to make a choice whether they want a career or a family. No matter how much girl power is there, the need to be a great mum or be a great parent often overrides the priority of furthering a career, or you have to make that sacrifice. And I know many career women who have to have that trade and compromise. Are we ever going to get to the point where women can have it all?
I think it's very difficult, and I think it needs a balance, really. But the fact is, we're in a patriarchal society, and in a patriarchal society, a masculine culture by default, the very, fundamental basis of that is distinct roles for men and women. Now, in my household, we have a very feminine culture. There are no clear gender roles between myself and my husband. And I'm quite interested to see how that influences my son as the years go on. I mean, he's definitely very subject to the influence of stereotyping in school, I notice. And so he's having to sort of make his own mind up about gender ideals, whether pink is an okay colour for him and that sort of thing, whether he can, have his nails painted if he wants to, and play with the girls, and all these things that, shouldn't really matter, but the social values and norms are being constructed at that age. He's 6, so he's in primary school. That's kind of where it's all coming together, and you can see different children have different ideas. some households will be more traditional than ours is. And yeah, we'll see how he grows up. But I think, he certainly doesn't see there's one role for mum and one role for dad. So, I think he'll grow up to be more open-minded and more kind of like understanding of difference.
Yeah, I was watching, I don't know if you've seen it, the Netflix series Adolescence, which everyone's talking about at the moment, and talk about incel, talking about the rise of if we say toxic masculinity. I know that's an inflammatory phrase. I don't mean that to be inflammatory to anyone listening, but it's kind of using the language of Andrew Tate and the followers, and how the incel movement is gaining traction amongst younger generation, young boys mainly. And that must be quite worrying, because there's almost like this pushback, or hang on a minute, women are getting too much. Men want to take their power back.
Yeah, it's very worrying. And, I wouldn't even repeat the things that are being communicated by Andrew Tate, because I think it is, it's a real concern and a worry. It should be for all of us, and what that creates. I mean, Andrew Tate, he's such an influential TikTok personality. His videos have been watched 11.6 billion times, according to the article I was reading. And that is, I'm sure, increased already. And it's creating really extreme views against women, I would say. And women, I would argue, which I think is fair to say, the figures really back this up. Women are already really disadvantaged and face a lot of barriers to kind of achievement, to being independent. And, I think that is really played down a lot. And we're in a society where a lot of households have two incomes. Whether that second income be part-time or full-time, but, both parents in the household are working. So, yeah, women need to be able to kind of participate. If they're being kind of treated equally in terms of financial responsibility, then they need to be able to participate equally as well. And I always think, we're educating our girls, we're paying to educate our girls, and that's exactly the right thing. But then we should be helping them to utilise their skills as well. There's so many women working in low-paid, low-skilled, part-time roles because they're trying to, raise the family at the same time, and that's a great loss to society. It's not a great use of the investment, I think, that we've put into women. But yeah, of course, as well as Andrew Tate, we've had the Mark Zuckerberg comments as well, haven't we, recently, about too much feminine energy is neutering the corporate world. And he's saying he wants a culture that celebrates aggression more. And really, what does that achieve for anybody, celebrating aggression? And I'm kind of, I think we need to have a better awareness of male and female styles and approaches, but it's a matter of bringing those all together for the benefit. And I mean, I kind of looked at the figures around the Meta senior leadership team and their board. Their leadership team is 1/3 women. Their board is 23% women, as far as I could tell, kind of just looking at the website. And so the board roles, that's about the same as the global average. They're making about $62 billion net profit, which seems pretty good to me. So it doesn't kind of look like women have, held them back too much. I think, Zuckerberg might actually agree that gender diversity on boards is good for business. And I just think, maybe his views are more related to the fear of the male elite losing their power in a patriarchal society, which the US and the UK are. But in terms of kind of the benefits for business, we know diversity is good. The figures show that, in terms of kind of boardroom representation, the boards that have a good representation of women, they celebrate, the benefits of different perspectives. They have better business performance, and they're more innovative and creative. So, there's a very clear argument for helping women to progress.
Yeah, I've written some articles on Sheryl Sandberg, the former Facebook executive, who is famous for her leaning in mantra. And the criticism coming that really she isn't a feminist. She's a complicit male applauder and promoting white women and not intersectional approach, and she's pulling up the ladder behind her for black women and people around her. So even though we have maybe female representation in some of these big mega corporates, are they really doing much for gender equality, or are they doing a lot for themselves?
And that is the question we need to ask. Pulling the ladder up behind them is extremely common. And kind of, what I see, sex discrimination is still an issue today. I can kind of give a personal example. When I was accessing financial services, not that long ago, it was me that went for the service. It was me that was paying for the service. And then when, I was looking to get a mortgage with my husband, they wanted to put my husband's name first on there, because it helps their filing. I mean, I just don't see it, I can't understand what the reason is why that's important. So if I'm your client and I'm paying, why does my husband's name need to go first? So that was really kind of, enlightening for me. And then we know that claims are going up as well. So, there's clearly things happening here. The figures show that ACAS are reporting a 6.2 increase in disputes between 23 and 24. In successful claims and an increase in the amount of money awarded. And I think kind of what's happening is, we've got there's lots of awareness about underrepresented groups and the barriers for them. I think you have lots of kind of empowerment programs for those underrepresented groups. And I think what's happening is, they are really empowered and they understand what's happening. They can see it. But then, I think where it goes wrong is businesses increase diversity, but they don't do the culture work to go with it. And so you'll have, there will be conflict, probably lots of microaggressions. Maybe, when concerns get raised, nothing happens and it can become like a really big, reputational issue. You're seeing lots of examples of it. I feel like I'm seeing it every week at the minute. It was Mid and North Wales Police having major issues with harassment and sex discrimination, BBC, McDonald's. There's been kind of quite a number in the last few weeks that are kind of really standing out for me. And I think it's, I think what's really important is understanding that men and women are different. I feel like that gets played down all the time. Like men and women are a homogenous group, but there's so much evidence that demonstrates the kind of how women are disadvantaged in society, and particularly from an economic point of view. And I'm really interested. I'm extremely passionate about the work of Deborah Tannen, who's a sociolinguist, and she wrote a book. And it's a bit dated now, but for me, it's such an important piece of work. And I know that she was kind of quite blown away about the interest in the kind of gender aspect of her work and has done a lot more on that as a result. But the book's called You Just Don't Understand Women and Men in Conversation. And what she talks about is, she says, male-female conversation is cross-cultural communication. She uses the term genderlect. And I quote, she says, learning each other's way of talking is a leap across the communication gap between men and women and a giant step towards genuine understanding. I think there are such fundamental differences, that are reinforced in many ways, through stereotypes and things like that we're just not talking about. And it's creating, we're in a world of polarization, aren't we? And it's just creating more and more polarization, and we need to kind of combat that by making all individuals aware. So, I think there's a place for women's empowerment programs, all the women in leadership programs. I think that's very important, but I also think it's important for organizations to be gender aware and make sure, all their colleagues have an understanding of how, women leaders are stereotyped and how that impacts them negatively and that sort of thing, and how to kind of like appreciate the range of different approaches that can be in the workplace.
Yeah, putting it back to what you were saying there around the difference between men and women, you specifically mentioned around conversation and language. Having spent a good part of my life surrounded and immersed in male culture and male groups, male language, male interests, male banter, male humour, and then crossing the fence, if you like, and spending the next part of my life almost entirely female focused in female groups and language. I can completely agree there is a difference in the whole tone of conversations and how you support each other. I'm not saying every male conversation is about competition and alpha male and trying to prove a point. I'm not saying every female conversation is around collaboration and helping and supporting each other. There are obviously shades of grey and a spectrum there, but I do find inherently female-based conversations are more inclusive, more collaborative, more supportive. Certainly in a friendship group, whereas male conversations are all about trying to pick holes in each other and trying to get one up. I find it really difficult now to spend much time in male company because I find it so exhausting. So
it is very different.
It's completely exhausting, and I really celebrate and embrace my female identity and being in female-only company because it's just, I just feel so much more at home with it. And yeah, and the also thing I notice is how I call it gender-coded language. So I can tell if I'm with a person or with people who code me as male or code me as female by the language and how they talk to me. At the extreme is I'm sitting in a taxi and I'm getting effing and blinding and mate and football and my wife this and my wife that, and that kind of laddie type conversation. Whereas if the taxi driver codes me as female, it's all right, love, how you doing? And it's a very much more relaxed, chatty sort of thing. And so I can very easily tell the energy that's coming towards me. And so it is different. And is that a construct? Have we invented that? Or is it just the differences between the genders?
It is so interesting, isn't it? So I don't know if you've read Tannen's work, but it very much sounds like you have. They are the types of things that she talks about. And I think it's really important to be clear that according to UN figures, they say that 90% of men and women hold bias against women. So kind of, what I've seen in the workplace at times is that, basically, well, a woman's said that, a woman's made that claim, so it must be true. There can't be this in it. It must be true because a woman said it about a woman, and it's like, well, no, because, we're in a patriarchal society and 90% of men and women hold those views about what's normal. So that's definitely not the way to judge it. But yeah, Tannen talks about exactly kind of what you've just shared, really, like report talk versus rapport talk. So, men are in conversation, they're competing for a higher status, and women want connection and relationships. So it's kind of the status versus relationship, competition versus connection. And it's really interesting. So I've got plenty of examples from home, and I wonder if kind of you and listeners can relate to this. But, I could give you a situation where, I might be kind of having my dinner with the family, and my husband's talking about frustrations from his day, and my response is, oh yeah, I know. Here's the thing that happened to me, So I'm trying to demonstrate how I understand what he's talking about. I've experienced it too. And his reaction to that is, you've just made it about yourself. Because he's thinking about status and competition. It has to be about one or two of us, and it's about me, because he wants it to be about him because, he's put that forward. Whereas to me, I'm just trying to, to build that connection. That's what's important to me. And yeah, I can, the examples of that at home all the time that I notice, and it's just kind of a natural thing.
I call that an empathy bridge. What you're trying to do is, I don't know what you're going through. I can't relate to everything, your lived experience, but what I can try and do is build empathy across this bridge to what you're saying against something I recognize. And to show connection with you, I'm repeating back in my own language, which then you think is diverting away from you. But actually, it's me checking my understanding in my own language.
And women might do that, and I think that's kind of quite typical in communication, and that's what Tannen demonstrates. I do wonder if there's been change over time. Like I say, her work's fairly dated now, but it's probably these. And I do think there's a lot more awareness today that, an individual's lived experience is their lived experience, and not to try and say, I know exactly, when you don't, because it's them. But I think, the approach in the communication and the kind of, the fundamental ways that men and women communicate and react to each other, they are still very much true and kind of need to be part of the debate.
I've never read that book or heard of that study before, so it's really interesting because I guess my perception is completely born out of lived experience and observation. And I guess when you're a member of the club on the inside, you get a true representation of the real language and the real culture that goes on. And I've been on both clubs, but I can't now go back to the old club. And I was never welcome in the same way in the new club. So when I'm in these situations now, I do have this before and after. I was a member of that club, now I'm not. And I see how it is. I'm a member of this club. Well, I wasn't before, and now I see how it is. And it really is a personal observation, just realizing and being hyper aware of what's going on. I'll give you a story. I had 2 nights out in Brick Lane in London. And for those who know, the East End of London is the bagel and curry place, the central for. And I was out with a group of men one night, and the men were talking about a fight they'd been in and how they had their nose broken and had stitches and they're bleeding and all this sort of thing. And there was 3 or 4 men in this group all talking about their broken noses. And I was out 2 or 3 nights later with a group of women in literally 100 yards down the road in Brick Lane. And they were talking about childbirth, and they were talking about stitches they'd had after childbirth and how much pain it was. I thought men were talking about their noses being broken and women were talking about their the stitches they'd had post-childbirth. And I just sort of sat there in my own little mind, chuckling inside my head thinking, this is so surreal. Same topic, different part of the body. So yes, we have commonality in what's important to us and how we want to share, but the motivation and the language we use is completely different.
All women have got a childbirth story. Total warriors, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And so in order to change society, the constructs of how we create gender, so I think what I'm hearing from you is there are fundamental differences that aren't just constructs. These are kind of our brains, the nurture versus nature. So there's a lot of nature in there as well. But if we want to change the aspirations and the way women are welcomed and embraced in the workplace and society as a whole, it's a generational shift, isn't it? Because what frustrates me is if you talk to maybe a woman who's maybe, I don't know, let's just say in their early teens, and a man in their early teens who are thinking about their aspirations to start a family, to get married, have children, all this kind of thing. They're already starting to think about, I want a little girl because I want a little boy, and I'm already thinking about the rough, tough, taking the football type stuff. So we're pre-programming the destiny of our offspring throughout our own childhood, adolescence, and creating our own aspirations for that family. So if we're going to have any way of breaking some of these stereotypes, rewriting the constructs, we've got to start training our young children today around gender equity and what a gender construct is and how we can break out of these. So young boys, young girls, young non-binary people, to try and talk about the damage that gender stereotypes cause. Because by the time we're in our 20s, no matter how woke we are or how enlightened we are, we're having gender reveal parties. We've got blue and pink start coming out, and we're starting to create aspirations of how we perceive our child is going to be based on their gender. That's the challenge we've got, isn't it? It's where we're trying to get right back to the point of influence where we start to break it. Because we can't break it for ourselves once we've got it.
That's it. And I don't think, I don't think people understand, the impact that has on girls and then the women they're going to become. Women typically have lower pensions. They have less saved in their pension because they're the ones that have had to kind of take a hit. Things have changed. We're not as kind of well supported by workplace pensions or state pensions, or, your partner. Couples don't necessarily stay together in the way that they used to. So, a lot of that security is gone. And I don't think we're aware enough or thinking enough about the future to be able to protect children against that. I mean, stereotyping starts from very young, very, very young. And kind of from previous research work that I've done, girls and boys start to get an idea of like what are male and female roles at the age of 3, by the age of 3. That's extremely young. And then I see in the school still, and I'm shocked by kind of how stereotypes are reinforced and what's happening kind of in the playground, for example, or after school clubs. So our school has a ballet club kind of for after school, and they're optional things that the children can join. And so, when my son came home and I knew there was an option for an after school ballet club, I said, are you going to do ballet? And he said, oh, well, isn't that just for girls? And I said, well, no, men do ballet as well. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to do ballet, you absolutely should. There's no reason why you wouldn't. But I think, that's all well and good, me having a one-on-one conversation with my son at home. But, what is the school doing to make sure the boys feel that they are welcome in that class, and to challenge the stereotype in the classroom, and make sure that, any boys that do decide to go are not going to be, teased and bullied for making that decision. Then football, my son is into football, and we never really expected that. I'm not sure. I kind of did suspect I might have a boy, but I'm in a family with many, many, many girls. So it was quite a big thing. So I never really expected I was going to be a football mum. And, whilst I kind of allow him to do whatever he likes, I also have been asking him, well, do you want to go to dance? Do you want to do these things? I'm trying to just encourage him to kind of be a bit more open. He went to gymnastics and things like that, and just allowing him to kind of think about all his options and not be like, well, you're a boy, you have to do football and all that. But I noticed in the playground, it appears that it is the boys that get the football area. And the girls can play if they want to, but the boys dominate, and the girls never have the opportunity to kind of take that as their space. So I just feel like the different roles are being reinforced in school. They're certainly not being challenged.
Yeah, the boys turn up with the football. It's their game, isn't it? They put the goalpost down. They pick the teams. That only changes when the girls have the football and they pick the teams and they put the goalpost down. So I guess like we're seeing in the Women's Premier League and the women's football sport, they're trying to carve out their own identity. They're not an alternative to the men's game. They're a game in their own right. Different personalities, different characters. I think that's the important thing. The girls don't need to play in the boys' game. They need to play their own game, and the boys are welcome in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I just don't think they're given that opportunity, because it's just assumed that the boys play football and the girls do this. And it's like, what if we didn't make that assumption? What would that look like? Or what if we said, actually, right, we're going to switch now. So if the girls want to play football and use that space, then they can have that on that day. And it's up to them, because the girls maybe don't want to play with the boys. And yeah, I'm so excited about the women's game in football. I find it so much more engaging. Never been a football fan at all, but I've been to some women's games. I watch them on the TV. I find them so much more enjoyable. The women are great to watch. I love the kind of team feeling. It just got a whole different feel to it and a different culture. And I've been to kind of live games, and it's got a much more family feel.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've been turned off by men's football just purely because it's all about masculine personalities. Sometimes it's egos and things and prima donnas. Whereas I genuinely feel that mostly when I watch women's football and other women's sports, there is very much a team, all for one-on-one full type. Genuinely, not pretending. And I think sometimes male football is all about the aggression, and there's too much I would call cheating. Going for the dive, going for the tackle. Women are quite rightly worried about their bodies and they're breaking bones and things, and they don't want to go in for that hard tackle, so they're more likely they go in hard. I'm not saying that they compromise anything, but they have a different approach to a non-contact sport. They don't push the point of contact, do they?
It's exactly that. And I think from what I see, they're more collaborative, they're more cooperative. They even, with the players from the different teams, they look after each other a little bit more. They're a bit more respectful. Whereas the guys are, they're dominant, they're assertive. It's just sort of all that typical gender stuff. They're focused on the competition, achievement, and that it's typical of kind of masculine, feminine culture. And I think that's a really kind of great place to see that difference play out.
We still have, we talk about these glass ceilings, we talk about the concrete cliffs and the concrete cliff edges where we don't have enough women in leadership positions. So we talk about the 30% club, we talk about all these different initiatives we have in the city and other places, trying to get women into senior roles. We can never quite get the momentum, can we? We're always, you talked about percentages here on the Facebook board and other boards, 25%. We're not seeing enough 60%, are we? 70%. We're not seeing that flip. What I find challenging and difficult is that when we're in a world now talking about anonymized recruitment processes, bias-free recruitment, that's great because we're anonymizing out who you are, whatever you may be. But the challenge is, if we want to rectify a 70-30 male-female representation, we can't hire one woman for every man because that ratio will never change. We have to hire 2.5 women for every male for the next 5 years in order to get that from 30, 40, 50, 60 to 50%. And I think that's what organizations aren't doing enough of. And the problem then is we end up with positive discrimination the other way, which no one's in favour of it either. But how do we create an environment then where we are actively recruiting women in a higher ratio to offset that balance without being discriminatory to men?
Yeah, I think, bias is a really important kind of subject to think about, because whilst we have all this, kind of awareness in recruitment and the kind of, name blind, all that sort of thing, we've still got bias. There is still bias at play in, the most engineered, to be fair, recruitment processes. If you kind of look at, how to get a job right now, it's sort of use your network, because if you are interviewing with people, then there'll be a positive bias, of some sort at play. And I think it's really interesting to consider kind of, and I've done a piece on this about this recently, about what is merit and who decides.
Yes, the BS of meritocracy. Yeah. One of my topics, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and women and all underrepresented groups, we are really happy to kind of put ourselves down, keep these barriers in the way. Kind of heard somebody kind of recently saying, I don't. Well, they were talking about Donald Trump and all his views on EDI policies, and they were saying, well, I agree with Donald Trump, actually, because I don't want to be recruited on the basis of merit. I don't want to be recruited just because I'm a woman or I'm this or I'm that. But I said, well, men have been getting recruited through the golf club forever, and through their networks forever. So why are we so reluctant to have the same privileges and opportunities? Why would we do that to ourselves? But we're so and that idea of merit has been created by those in power to protect their own position. And, we play right into that, don't we? But, the stereotypes are very clear, in terms of women in leadership, all these kind of, it's a really fine line that women leaders have to walk, because there can't be too much this, there can't be too much that. If women were to communicate in the same way as a man, a woman leader, in the same way as a male leader, they can often be labelled negatively, like they're aggressive, they're controlling. And you've got all the kind of, aspects that kind of Tannen describes playing out there. Things like, if a male leader was to go into a room and think it's cold, they might just say, it's cold in here, someone close a window. A woman is more likely to come in and say, anybody feel cold? Do you think we should close the window? Like it's a choice, like she's making a suggestion, but actually, if you think about, they're hoping that they can rely on hierarchy, that people will know. Made the suggestion about closing the window, someone will close the window, but it doesn't kind of quite happen in the same way. But, if a woman comes in and says, it's cold in here, close the window, gives it as an order or an instruction, that's often not perceived well. And you have different groups. You have, women leaders who kind of really hold on to their authenticity and their identity and their approach and say, I'm going to do it in my own way. And my way is, compassionate, empathetic, understanding, some might say softer, more gentle, yeah. Some women, are going to do that. Others are, used to a more masculine culture and think, I've got to be like that to be successful, and kind of that's what we're fighting against, really.
Yeah. I heard Rose Ayling-Ellis on, I think it was BBC Radio 2 the other morning, and there was something she said which cut right into me, and I thought, wow. And she said, I have a sign interpreter here for you, because I know you, many of you, don't use sign language, can't speak sign language. So my interpreter's there for you, not for me. They're there for you because you don't speak sign language. I thought, wow, what empowerment and ownership of that situation. And I thought that was incredible. And what made me think of that is what listening to you, because in order for women to succeed, often they're told they need to be more like men to overcome the biases. When you speak, you don't end the sentence in an uptick. You have to go land it down to sound more authoritative. Otherwise, it sounds like a question and uncertainty. That's a bias. That in the way you speak, I hear that uptick. I think it's a question, not a statement. In order for women to be taken more seriously, we're saying you have to speak more like a man. Actually, what we should be saying is we need to be speaking We need to be learning how to listen better and not making an assumption based on what we hear. In the same way that Rose Ailing-Ellis says, the science interpreter's for you, not for me. And mine was going, hang on a minute, I thought it's for you. It's not. It is for me. You can speak perfectly happily with sign language. I can't. Wow. So it's about reframing those views and allowing people to succeed for who they are, not to comply with someone else's definition of what credible is. And I made the decision not to retrain my voice, because to make other people feel comfortable with my voice. So I've chosen to keep it because it's my voice. And if you've got a problem with it, that's your problem, not mine. So I think we need to be able to challenge this BS, the meritocracy, what is valuable, what succeeds. That's the challenge that we as women have to face, is to get people to say, you're good enough, you're fabulous, you're wonderful. Actually.
Yeah, perfectly wonderful in your way. You don't have to try to be something else, because it's about performance and results. But the awareness is absolutely fundamental, isn't it? Because otherwise you're just placing judgment on something you think is right, and no one's ever challenged a question. Again, like the whole idea of merit. If you think like merit is a thing that's kind of, you have it or you don't, then you're going to probably, you're going to make one assumption. If you are aware that merit is something that is defined by somebody, it's a decision that gets made, then it's totally different, isn't it? I mean, I kind of noticed, with my teams that we were kind of recruiting the same. And what I said to them was, well, first of all, can you look at the questions and the process and think about how to make this a level playing field? Because, we don't want to advantage somebody who's internal, for example, or already in the sector, because do we actually need that? Or how can we kind of look at create that level playing field so everyone's got, starting from the same place and got the same opportunity. And also I'd say to them, we need to look for culture add, not culture fit. And I think that changes your bias when you come into that recruitment decision. And then, of course, it's all the other things like having a diverse panel, as far as you possibly can, making sure it's not all kind of, well, I'd say more than two types, because, typically you'll have male, female, but actually how can you diversify even more than that on your panel? Because that's what you want to be doing, really. But kind of women are having to kind of work in this really awkward and difficult situation, figure out like who they are, who do they have to be, do they have to be that, all the time. They're facing a range of different barriers at home, like the barriers in relation to the reproduction of life, like all sorts of things that women might be going through around trying to conceive, or maybe pregnancy loss, which is hugely played down. So, kind of society sort of tells you that's nothing and you just should be carrying on because that's not really a thing. But actually psychologically, it's very impactful. And pregnancy and maternity discrimination, whether you think, you're thinking you have a baby or not, it really doesn't matter. Like employers, if you're a woman of a certain age, are still discriminating against kind of women in that group.
I've got a story about that. I was working in an organisation, and 2 or 3 of my male colleagues in a meeting said, we should do a sweepstake. Our colleague Helen has just got engaged. How quickly when she's going to get married? Who's going to guess how quickly she'll get married? And then it was how quickly after she was married would she fall pregnant? And that was a sweepstake, a serious sweepstake. And they all went, oh yeah, I'll put a quid on August, and I'll put a quid on next February for being pregnant. And that's still the perception that a woman can't get married, or can't get engaged, or can't have their own family life without people judging what that means. Men would be, great, we have a stag weekend, and we all kind of slap each other on the back without any expectation that person is going to want to be an active part of their family. And that breaks, you then, that was very gender stereotype there. We have female couples, we have male couples, non-binary couples, and a whole mix of different permutations in relationships. Men are being judged as workers, women are being judged as homemakers, and we need to break that barrier down and make it acceptable both ways.
Absolutely. So, I remember, I was going for a new role just before I got married, and I was saying, I was wondering to myself, and I was asking other people, do you think I should take my engagement ring off? Because are they going to, judge me based on that? Would that disadvantage me wearing an engagement ring? And then, I had one conversation with someone who said, well, if that happens, it's not the right workplace for you. And I thought, yeah. So kept the ring on, got the job, and that was great. And they were a fantastic employer. But there's so much like that. And it's really clear in my household, because like I say, we're very equal. And throughout my career, I campaigned for shared parental leave. And so, it was only right that we made the most of that, and it worked for our financial situation. So I went back to work after our baby was 5 months old. My husband had 3 months off full time. And before I had the baby, people were saying to me, "Oh, will you give up work? When the baby comes, will you give up work?" And I was absolutely horrified, thinking, why on earth would I do that? I've worked really hard to get where I am. Why would I give up work? And then they'll say, so I'd just say to them that, not planning on doing that. I'm expecting to still go back full time because, in my bit of an occupational hazard, but very aware of the motherhood penalty. So I was going to try and resist that as far as possible. So, and then, baby came, as I thought, wanted to go back to work. So I went back quite early. And yes, my husband was off full time. And I said to him one morning, and I don't know why now it was a morning. That seems a funny time to have this conversation, but I was getting ready for work, ready to leave the house. He was sorting out the baby, ready for the day. And I said to him, has anybody asked you if you're going back part-time? And he said, no one, not a single person had asked him that, even though he's off 3 months full-time, on shared parental leave. And I said, I must have been asked about 20 times, are you coming back part-time? Because that's just an assumption that gets made, despite the fact if I did that, I'd be losing my salary, I'd be losing my pension, I'd probably be having to do the same job. That's typical anyway for all women, but I was a director, it's a job that's got to be done. I'm running, the organisation in Wales. I have to get this job done, and I can't just say I'm not going to do that bit, but I'm going to kind of flex my hours in this way. So, yeah, and it has serious financial penalties for women.
And that is sort of the problem as well. You have part-time hours and part-time money, but full-time responsibility. So you still end up cramming your 40 hours into 32 or into 28 or something. And again, that's the penalty that many women, they feel they have to do that to meet the expectations of not being a slacker, not being, being committed. It's very difficult to just sort of say, oh, it's 4:30, pick the kids up from school, I'm off now, bye. In many environments. I also recognise there are many organisations, because I go into organisations to provide training courses, and are very conscious about the fact, what time do you want the day to end? And quite often they'll say, well, we need to wrap it up by 3:30 because some people have got childcare and they need to go off and collect their kids and things. And I said, absolutely fantastic. And I now almost schedule the courses 10 till 3:30 deliberately, so people got time to come in and they've got time to leave at the end. Whereas if you go for the old style, 9 o'clock till 5, that doesn't work for everybody, does it?
It doesn't. And I think, one of my concerns at the minute is about this, push to return people to the office, because home working is really beneficial for many, anyone with caring responsibilities, people with disabilities, and returning to the office is going to have a negative impact on them. And kind of I've heard senior leaders saying, well, they can just arrive late and leave early. Well, are you going to pay them for that, or do you expect them to take a pay cut? And I suspect, it will be a reduction in pay as well. And what I really believe in and what I'm promoting is a different approach to performance management that's about results, not time, because that just allows people to work flexibly as they need to get the work done, and as long as they're actually delivering what is required. And that's less to do with outputs, because I always kind of used to say, my colleagues would be saying, written so many reports. Well, that's great, but if they're sitting on the shelf making no difference at all and not being read, then that was, to be honest, a waste of time. So really thinking about, right, what do you need that individual to achieve, and what's fair for the amount of time that you're paying them, or for the amount of money you're paying them, and managing in that way instead, and really looking at, did that person deliver what we pay them to do or not?
You mentioned earlier about it. Well, I think you mentioned Margaret Atwood's *Handmaid's Tale*. We talked about the impact of that. In certain parts of the world, I feel that there's almost this potential for that dystopia to come to fruition in some parts. Especially if you drew a map of Gilead and laid it over the US, and it's kind of the central belt, the central block of the US is Gilead in that story. California, New York, and the coastal areas are kind of the old US, if you like, affiliated to Canada. So we're seeing abortion rights pulled back. We're seeing trans rights. We're seeing queer rights, gay rights, next on the cards. We're seeing these pure Christian values coming back into play. Could that happen in Europe? Could that happen in the UK?
I can believe anything. And, now, after I've kind of had so many things happen where I thought that would never happen, like the pandemic, Brexit, all this sort of stuff. So now I can believe anything. Yeah, it's, back to the polarization, isn't it? And the kind of Andrew Tate movement and how social media is allowing these extreme messages to reach people, and how it's influencing their view of the world and what they think is right and wrong, and it influences their behavior and their attitudes. So yeah, I can believe, that it could happen. I don't want to believe it, and I'll work really hard to make sure it doesn't. But yeah, we should all be concerned about that, I think.
Do you think men should have their hormones tested to see if they've got too much testosterone in their bloodstream that might give them an unfair advantage against other men?
It's really interesting you say that, because actually I think that, it just opens a really interesting avenue into menopause treatment for women, because I believe more women should be prescribed testosterone. There's a great reluctance. There isn't like a product on the market for females. So women who are being given testosterone, and that includes myself, are having to use products that are for men and just sort of do their best, make the best of it. There are private products. I think there's something in Australia that is for a female market. And yeah, there's a real reluctance to give women testosterone. But I can tell you that, a perimenopause symptom is sort of anxiety, reduction in self-esteem, lower self-confidence. There's a lot of kind of psychological impacts of perimenopause that are often, not properly diagnosed by GPs and not treated in the right way. And I was lucky to be able to go and see a private specialist who put me on testosterone, and it's been transformational. I just wish, and I can't imagine that I could have enough to have as much as Donald Trump, for example. And I look at that and think, what would it take to have that amount of, testosterone and confidence? And surely I must be able to have that, because I've got a whole packet upstairs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a medic by any shape of the imagination or endocrinologist, but my understanding is that estrogen in the female body converts to testosterone, and women will have a testosterone level, whatever the units are, of around 1 to 4% of whatever, or nanomoles, or whatever this ratio is. And men tend to have 20 plus to 40 odd nanomoles. But both bodies are designed to run with testosterone lubrication in different amounts. And you're right, when perimenopausal, menopause, postmenopausal women, because they haven't got so much estrogen in their system, then they can't convert that to testosterone. So microdosing, testo gel, or whatever the gel is you can put on, is going to be a benefit. But what I've learned through my wife is that there's almost a reluctance to hormone profile cis women, because they say it makes no sense because we don't know what that means. And I think, well, if you've never got a baseline, you're never going to know what it means. But what you could say is, statistically, this person has a lower estrogen, a lower testosterone, lower progesterone. Therefore, statistically, they're more likely to be having anxiety, heat flushes, itchy skin, brain fog, all the kind of menopausal symptoms, statistically. And if we add a little bit of HRT gel, bit of testosterone, as you say, then we can then observe the change. But no one's doing that observation. They're not saying, let's try a bit. Whereas I get my hormone profile taken every year to make sure that my levels are correct. Why me? Why isn't every woman, every man getting hormone profile testing, just to create these baselines to be able to understand society the effect of these hormones? Because they affect your brain, they affect your mood, they affect your reaction to stimulus, everything. Those three, testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen, with a bit of prolactin, the other hormones, have a huge impact on your health and well-being.
Exactly. And think of the impact on women's careers, because it's that age group that are most likely to be in leadership roles. And they're also most likely or more likely, to have increased care and responsibilities. And women are having children later, and they're also, having to care for adults. So I think you've got, a cohort of women who are kind of stuck in that 40s age group that have got children, older parents, perimenopause, they're in a leadership role. Something gives in the end.
Yeah, and being right in the middle of that sandwich generation ourselves, we've got elderly parents. Over the last 2 years, we've dealt with hospitalisation, nursing homes, engaging with social services, old people's mental health services, all the things that you think, blimey, there's no handbook on this. When you're starting your family, there's antenatal classes. Everyone's kind of helping you out how to have a baby. It's kind of in your brain about that nurture side of looking after your family. But suddenly you get to your mid to late 50s, and suddenly you've got this adult child with new responsibilities, and no one helps you. Social services aren't any good. Hospitals aren't any good. They want to treat the physical. They don't want to treat the emotional or the mental. And you soon learn that you're woefully ill-equipped to be a later life carer for elderly parents or elderly relatives. It's a real
imagine
shock.
if you are, a working woman trying to, manage everyday life.
I am a working woman, and I do have to do that. Yeah, and it's
well, of course, I'm just thinking kind of for listeners, thinking about that, and like all the, the kind of pile up of challenges that are, not well supported. Women often, typically not getting adequate medical care for women's health matters, not getting, finding very difficult to navigate adult social care, paying. I mean, at its worst, our childcare bill was twice our mortgage, so sort of having to grapple with all of these things whilst pretending that, there's nothing to see here and contributing, in the workplace like you're an equal, it's not easy.
No, my wife and I, we both talked about this many times, where both our parents are similar ages, both are going through that stage. And we've said to each other that we could not have coped had we been working for an employer. We only had the flexibility and the ability to be able to react and care and deal with because we were self-employed working together. We both reflect on that. But we have a luxury that most of the population don't have. They work for somebody else. They have to be accountable for their time and being there. And you don't want to say, sorry, I can't today, or actually my elderly father's had a fall and I had to wait half the night for an ambulance. The ambulance only got here half an hour ago. I need to go to bed. I'm sorry, I can't come in today. And that's random, isn't it? You've got no choice about nobody else to deal with it. You just got to pick up that situation. And so the childcare aspect, again, you can't say to your child, sorry, don't throw up this morning because I've got a big meeting to deliver a project today. I'm sorry, you got a temperature. What do I do? So we create that stress, don't we? And again, we talk about things like psychological safety in the workplace. You need to be able to talk about this challenges in your life. Otherwise, you're just going to bottle it up. That's when you get burnout, stress, anxiety, and all those other things creep in.
Exactly. And it's still typical that, I heard an example recently where, there was a friend kind of had a child off sick. And so the husband kind of rang up the employer and said, I need to take the day off work. My child's off sick. And the employer said, well, can't your wife do it? It's really typical and still a view today.
Yeah. And we do have these gendered expectations. And that's I think what I said earlier, we've got to try and train our younger adults, our younger children, to start breaking this now, because once they become ingrained, it's really hard to rock that boat. So if you're listening to this and you've got a young person who's under 10 years old, now is the time to empower them both, not just the girls, but empower the boys as well to break this BS of constructive gender.
And that's kind of like another really good reason why I love women's football so much. I love that, my son is watching women's football and, they are role models for him. And so he's growing up with, different views. And I'm really interested to see what these kind of, younger generations coming through, what their attitudes are going to be and how they might shape equality in the workplace going forward.
Fingers crossed. Christine, it's been absolutely fantastic. We've been yakking away now for over an hour. How do people get hold of you? How do people find out more?
Well, you can visit the website, 3minuteleadership.com, and there's lots of good, content, articles, resources around leadership, culture and inclusion that they can access there. Or I am Christine Boston on LinkedIn.
Excellent. And I found you because that's where I worked out that we connected back in 2018. So, yeah. Christine, thank you so much for your time. And if you're listening to this, I'm sure you found this useful as well. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. It was good. Yeah. I think I kind of, covered everything that I was hoping to get to.
As we bring this conversation to a close, I want to express my deepest gratitude to you, our listener, for lending your ear and heart to the cause of inclusion. If today's discussion struck a chord, consider subscribing to Inclusion Bites and become part of our ever-growing community, driving real change. Share this journey with friends, family and colleagues. Let's amplify the voices that matter. Got thoughts, stories, or a vision to share? I'm all ears. Reach out to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk and let's make your voice heard. Until next time, this is Joanne Lockwood, signing off with a promise to return with more enriching narratives that challenge, inspire, and unite us all. Here's to fostering a more inclusive world, one episode at a time. Catch you on the next bite.